Unfortunately, most decisions in their lives are made by people based on strong emotions, which is why they ruin their lives and the lives of people close to them. Instead of first understanding the situation, they proceed to drastic measures. Diane, are you and your husband having issues? The question was so unexpected that for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. What do you mean by issues? I guess we have the usual problems that come with any marriage. Why? My colleague averted her eyes, focusing on her hands as if debating whether or not to continue. Once she decided, she went on. Look, I don't know how to say this, but you know my husband took me away last weekend for our anniversary, right? Well, I'm pretty sure I saw your husband at the same hotel, and he was there with another woman. What? Are you sure? That can't be right. He would never do something like that to me. You must be mistaken. Well, I guess it's possible, but it really looked like him. If it wasn't him, then he has a twin. We saw them together several times, acting all affectionate, and I'm almost certain it was your husband. Mark had been away last weekend, supposedly on a fishing trip with his friends. Now it seemed like he had been fishing for something else, and it looked like he'd caught it. I felt like crying, screaming, and tearing his throat out all at once. How could he do this to me? What was wrong with him that he'd throw away 7 years with me for a fling with some woman? I muttered my thanks to Jane and slumped into the oversized chair I kept for visitors in my office. As I searched my mind for any clues that he'd been acting suspiciously, I came up empty. I'd heard about the typical signs, being overly attentive or extra affectionate. But that wasn't Mark. He'd been his usual self, caring and helpful. Was that his strategy? Did he know about those signs and made sure not to show them? I was completely lost. No, it couldn't be my Mark. Jane had to be right. It had to be someone who just looked like him. But the nagging doubts wouldn't go away. What if it really was him? How could I know for sure? If I asked him, he'd only deny it. If he was cheating, he would have warned his friends to cover for him, so I wouldn't get anywhere there either. Thinking back to Sunday night when he came home, I tried to remember if anything seemed off. He'd come in, kissed me on the cheek, grabbed a beer, and started talking about his weekend. Nothing out of the ordinary. He had mentioned that the fish weren't biting, and that the few they caught were undersized and had to be released. That part was strange. Mark never comes home empty-handed. He's an excellent fisherman and knows that river like the back of his hand. He's been fishing there ever since his father gave him his first rod when he was 6. He might actually be telling the truth, but how could I find out for sure? I decided to call one of his friends' wives under the pretense of discussing the upcoming school fair, and during the conversation, I'd casually ask about the fish he supposedly caught. Yes, that seemed like a good plan. The phone rang almost to the end before Emily finally answered, just as I was about to hang up. Hi, Emily. It's Diane Andrews. How have you been? We started with the usual small talk. Kids, school, and sales at the mall. I didn't want to seem too eager, so I let the conversation stretch for about 20 minutes before getting to the real reason for my call. I couldn't just ask outright. That would raise suspicion, and it might get back to Mark through her husband. Emily, do you happen to have any good trout recipes? I'm getting a bit bored with the usual baking or grilling, and I'm looking for something a bit more exciting. How did you cook the fish Dave brought home on Sunday? I held my breath while Emily yelled at her kids to be quiet, saying she was on the phone. Sorry, Diane. Trout recipes, huh? Well, Dave isn't very adventurous with food, so I usually stick to the usual recipes. The fish he caught last weekend are still in the freezer. I wasn't planning to cook them until later this week, or maybe I'll throw them on the grill over the weekend. As she continued to speak, my thoughts wandered far away. That jerk lied to me. The others caught the fish, but he didn't. Why? Because he wasn't fishing. He was having fun with some woman. Well, When I'm done with him, his bait won't be too good. Diana? Diana, are you still here? Emily's insistent voice brought me back to reality, and I answered through tears. Yes, I'm here. Sorry, the washing machine is malfunctioning. I have to go. I'll call you back later. Thanks for the advice. While my first reaction was to confront him, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had no hard evidence. He would have just lied to get out of it, and would have been more careful. I needed more proof. That evening, Mark seemed distant as we sat down for dinner. He complimented the meal, but there was no spark in him. When I tried to start a conversation, he responded with short, one-sentence answers, clearly preoccupied with something else. I hoped it was guilt gnawing at him, just as it was eating away at me. Later, we sat watching TV for a bit before he made a move. I'm heading to bed. I'm not feeling too great, so I think I'll turn in early. Are you coming up now? No, I think I'll watch a bit more of this show. The girls at work said it's really worth watching, so I thought I'd give it a try. I'll come up later. Good night. Mark leaned in to kiss me, but I turned my head and his lips ended up on my cheek. His surprised expression was a sign I needed to come up with something fast. Sorry, honey. I just don't want to catch whatever you've got. I can't afford to get sick right now with the Michael account coming up. Sweet dreams. My imagination is running wild. I couldn't bring myself to kiss him after he cheated on me. I watched a cheesy sitcom while waiting for him to fall asleep. An hour later, I tiptoed quietly into our bedroom and looked inside. At 6 feet 2 inches tall, he barely fit in our double bed, his head resting on a crumpled pillow at the headboard. His hair was soaked with sweat, matted and stuck to his head and face like a light cap. He was sweating profusely and his body was glistening with sweat. He must have had a restless sleep, as the sheets on his side of the bed were rumpled. Mark was usually a peaceful sleeper, but I couldn't help wondering if his restless sleep was because of a guilty conscience, or if he was dreaming about her. Damn him! He always slept nigh Ed, and tonight was no different. Lying on his back, his body was completely exposed to my gaze, and I saw him in a new way. I loved this man with all my heart, and now I could lose him. Is that really what I wanted? Maybe it was just a one-time affair, and he'd never betray me again. Did I really want to go through with my plan? I had to. I had to know the truth. No matter how painful or what the consequences might be, I had to find out. Mark was my first real love, the man I envisioned spending the rest of my life with, and the one I wanted to father my children. How could he jeopardize all of that? I quietly picked up his wallet from the nightstand and quickly searched it for any signs of evidence. I expected to find an address, a phone number, or maybe even con-arms. When we were dating, Mark always carried a few in his wallet. But after I switched to birth control, he didn't need them anymore. If I found any now, it would be yet another nail in the coffin of our marriage. His wallet and pants pockets were free of any clues, so where else could I look? Next, I checked his briefcase and car, but they yielded the same empty results. It had turned into a sort of game for me. Each time I came up with nothing, I felt a wave of disappointment, as if I had lost. I then looked into his email account on our home computer, and after finding it clean, I moved on to his cell phone. No success there either. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, trying to figure out my next step. In my mind, he was guilty as could be, and the absence of evidence didn't mean anything at all. The thrill of what I was doing had me all wound up, and the coffee only heightened my already frenzied state of mind. I reflected on what I had accomplished so far and concluded that he wasn't clever enough to have left no traces of his infidelity. I just needed to uncover them. Then it struck me. I knew exactly where to look: his fishing gear. He was aware that I never meddled with his equipment for fear of damaging something, and besides, I had no interest in fishing. In the garage, I searched through his tackle box and various accessories but had no luck. I only ended up with a couple of hook pricks on my fingers, which only fueled my anger toward him. Just when I was about to give up, I noticed his fishing jacket hanging on a hook behind the side door. Being more cautious this time to avoid hurting myself, I went through the pockets and finally discovered what I was looking for. A packet of complimentary matches from the Hyatt Hotel in Carlton, a small town roughly 2 hours away from here. In my current frame of mind, that was enough evidence to condemn him. We had never visited that hotel together, and I couldn't think of a plausible explanation for his presence there alone. Let's see how he gets out of this one. As the reality of his infidelity sank in, the true pain began to hit me. I spent the next 2 hours cycling through anger, frustration, and humiliation. I felt an urge to rush upstairs, drag him from our bed and confront him, but that didn't feel like enough. I wanted him to experience the same hurt he had inflicted on me. I needed to see him suffer the same kind of pain and anguish I was feeling. While contemplating my next move, a small but clever idea began to form in my mind. By the time I was ready for bed, I had nearly mapped out my plan of action. I was determined to take revenge on this jerk. I would go out and sleep with someone else, then bring the proof back home to Mark. I'd show him that two can play at this game. The problem was that I still loved him, and the idea of losing him was just as painful as the thought of his infidelity. I didn't want to go through with a divorce, even though my initial reaction was to throw him out on the street. It would have been easy to find someone to sleep with. At 32, I still looked good, and the guys at the office continued to flirt with me. A few of the sales reps I interacted with tried to make advances now and then, but I had always turned them down. I had my choice of several guys, some of whom were quite attractive. One young man, Andy, stood out from the rest. He made nearly every girl in the office swoon whenever he entered the room. At just 21 and fresh out of university, where he had excelled thanks to a sports scholarship, Andy was quite the catch. He stood 6 feet tall, with dark, piercing eyes and a toned physique. Despite his appeal, he was quiet and humble, seemingly unaware of the effect he had on the women around him. His innocent demeanor only added to his allure. I decided that Andy would be my way to get back at Mark. All I needed to do was seduce him, and since he was a man, that shouldn't be too difficult. Over the next week, I made my choice in favor of Andy. I dressed to highlight my best features by choosing the best outfits. I also wore my shortest, figure-hugging skirts. Naturally, I attracted a lot of attention to myself, and this time I took advantage of it. Flirting with guys made me feel wanted again. Mark did all this for me too. He was always attentive, surprising me with gifts, bouquets of roses, and little notes hidden so that I could discover them. However, when I found out about his infidelity, I doubted my sensuality. This newfound attention was the balm that helped me heal my wounded ego. Andy was an easy target. When he first saw me, his jaw dropped and he stood there in disbelief. Going up to him, I gently closed his mouth and said in the most seductive voice I could, "Hello, my love. Do you like what you see? If you play your cards right, you can see a lot more, if that's what you want." Leaving him in suspense, I turned and walked away, emphasizing each step with a sway of my hips. This movement has always provoked a violent reaction from Mark. I was wondering if it would have the same effect on Andy. For the next 3 days, I kept teasing him, and he became increasingly attentive and suggestive in his flirting. Several girls advised me to stop, saying it wasn't fair since he lacked experience with women and might misunderstand my intentions. However, Jane was fully aware of my motives and offered more straightforward advice. "Diane, what you're doing isn't fair to Andy. He has no clue that you're using him to get back at your husband. If you must do this, at least choose someone who can handle what's coming." "Thanks, Jane, but I think Andy will enjoy this. Who knows, I might even make it a regular thing with him." Jane just shrugged and walked away, shaking her head, leaving me to follow my plan. As she closed the door, she gave one last piece of advice. That would be a huge mistake. Andy was intrigued, but he hadn't made any moves yet, and I couldn't wait to get started. The thought of being intimate with such a handsome guy drove me crazy. I also shielded Mark from any romantic thoughts he might have. Confused by the situation, he began to get annoyed because of my unwillingness to discuss our problems. I wanted him to think about it, but not for too long. I decided that this Saturday would be the day of my revenge. "Andy, are you busy on Saturday night?" The light in his eyes suggested the answer even before he could answer. "No, I don't have any special plans. Why are you asking?" "I was wondering if you would like to invite a woman to dinner, dance, and what else might happen after that. Would you be interested?" "Oh, of course." Then his expression changed. "But you're married. What about your husband?" "He doesn't need to know. Besides, we have a kind of agreement." I filled in the gaps in my mind. "He just doesn't know about it yet." "Yes, of course." His face lit up with a knowing smile. "Where would you like to go?" "I thought we could have dinner in a small, cozy restaurant, dance in a club, and then maybe rent a room somewhere. How do you like this offer?" Andy blushed, but managed to pull himself together enough to realize that he needed to take the next step. "It sounds funny. I know a great place, and there's a motel nearby. I can book a room if you want. It looks like a date to me. You can pick me up at the north entrance of the mall at 7 p.m., and we'll drive your car." Leaning over, I kissed him and whispered, "See you then, dear." The plan was already in progress, and I don't think I could have stopped it now, even if I wanted to. The next step was to tell Mark that I had a girls' night out planned and wouldn't be home until late. If Andy turned out to be everything I dreamed of, I might not even come back until Sunday. After dinner that evening, I dropped the news on Mark. "Mark, darling, I spoke to Susan today. She and a few of the girls are going out on Saturday, and I've decided to join them." "Oh, I was hoping we could have a quiet evening at home to work through our issues. Can't you go another time?" I shot Mark a stern, "Don't mess with me" look and said, "I'm going out whether you like it or not. I don't go out often, and there might not be another night like this for who knows how long. Or maybe there could be." Mark began to respond, but changed his mind and left the table. As he turned toward the door, he said, "Thanks for caring." Then he headed to his workshop, probably to fiddle with his frustrating fishing gear. I saw the hurt in his eyes and almost gave in, but then my anger flared up and I pictured him with some blonde airhead in my mind. "Fuck you," I shouted after him. "It's not like you care about my feelings." He had already left, and I don't think he heard the last part. The disagreement turned out in my favor, leading him to stay in the spare bedroom for the next 2 nights. My final thought before going to bed that night was that this could easily become his permanent room if he wasn't careful. It felt unusual since it was the first time I had slept alone since we got married. By Friday morning, he had left before I woke up, so I had no idea how he was handling the situation, hopefully not well. I never realized how vindictive I could be, and it was a genuine surprise. On one hand, I was glad he was experiencing pain, but watching him suffer was almost as difficult for me. I truly loved him, despite his unfaithful behavior. To help reduce the tension, I decided to prepare a special dinner for him on Friday night. I made baked potatoes, grilled asparagus, and one of the trout he had caught a couple of weeks earlier, seasoned with herbs, chili, garlic, and olive oil, all wrapped in foil. I knew this was one of his favorite dishes and hoped it would help soothe his mind a bit. It would also alleviate the guilt I was beginning to feel. The phone rang just as I was adding the final details to the table decorations. Removing the earring from my right ear, I held the phone to my shoulder. "Andrews's residence." The surrounding noise was so loud that I could barely hear him. "Hey, Diane, it's Mark. A few guys are going out tonight, and since you're going out tomorrow, I thought I'd join them. Don't stay up waiting for me. I'll probably be very late." He hung up before I could reply. He sounded really angry, and for a moment I questioned whether my revenge was worth it. Damn him. Why does he always do this? Out with the guys. I bet he's with a girl of easy virtue again tonight. Well, we'll see who has the better time. I tried to get some sleep but kept tossing and turning until he came home at 3 a.m. I heard his door shut and then 2 thuds as his shoes hit the floor. After that, it was silent. On Saturday morning, I woke up early and prepared another surprise for him. When Mark finally showed up at 12:30, he looked awful. He was still wearing the clothes from the day before, but instead of looking neat, he was disheveled and had bleary eyes. The front of his shirt was stained, and the right knee of his beige pants was muddy. A single grunt was all he replied to my upbeat, "Good afternoon." I have to confess my intention was more to annoy him than to express genuine feelings. He reached for a cup of coffee and took a seat, or rather collapsed, at the kitchen table. "I saved your dinner for you. It's your favorite, so I figured you might want it for lunch." With that, I placed a plate of charred leftovers in front of him. Leaving that kind of food in a fan-forced oven on high for 2 hours can really ruin it. It took him a few moments to realize what I had done. He shoved the plate away and groaned. Very funny. After finishing his coffee, he returned to bed to try and sleep off his hangover. Perhaps he had been out with the guys the previous night. In his current state, he wouldn't have been much use in bed. Maybe she had broken up with him. The thought made me smile. "Well, Marky, if you think you're feeling bad now, just wait until I get home tonight. Or whenever." Saturday flew by. With Mark out of the picture, I could take all the time I wanted to get ready without worrying about his opinion. Not that it mattered to me anymore. This plan had taken on a life of its own, and I was being carried along by the forces driving it. By 6 o'clock, I was nearly done getting ready and had just slipped into my dress. While I was selecting my shoes, Mark emerged from the shower. I hadn't heard him get up and head to the guest bathroom. He had entered our room to grab some clean clothes and noticed what I intended to wear. "Damn, Diane, you're not going out with the girls dressed like that, are you? Do you have a date? Don't do this. We can work it out. Please don't go through with this." His pleading made him sound weak, which only fueled my anger. I snapped and shouted at him, "I told you I'm going out with the girls. If you want to talk, we can discuss it when I get back. Maybe then you'll listen to me. Now gather your things and leave. I need to finish getting dressed or I'll be late." Mark stood there, staring, and then said something I never expected him to say. Any thought I had that he was weak vanished as I heard the strength in his voice. "Diane, I know you're cheating on me. I don't know with whom, but when I find out, he'll be named in the divorce. Your behavior these past 2 weeks has been so distant, and now this. I can only conclude that you're having an affair." A tear rolled down his cheek, and he wiped it away before continuing. "I won't be a cuckold. If I find proof that you cheated, our marriage is over. Think about that before you leave tonight." As he grabbed his clothes from the closet, I responded, "What's good for the goose is good for the gander." Confused by my remark, he went to dress in the guest room. He was now taking the moral high ground because he didn't know I was aware of his own infidelities. He wouldn't be so confident once everything came to light. At least, that's what I tried to convince myself. He hadn't come downstairs before I left, so I left him a note, taped to the fridge door. I knew Mark well, and whenever he faced a problem, he reached for a beer. It doesn't mean he's an alcoholic, but having a beer in hand helps him think. Many men are like that. Mark, you know how much I love you, but the past 2 weeks have been incredibly tough for me. I understand that we need to have a conversation, so I've decided to be home by 2 a.m. Please stay up for me. I believe we can resolve our issues and work on healing our marriage. More than anything, I want you to be my husband. However, I'm worried that without addressing our problems, this might not be possible. With all my love, Diane Andy was waiting for me when I arrived, and my heart skipped a beat when I saw him. The shy guy had disappeared. He was dressed to impress in a red silk shirt. The wide but tailored trousers fit him flawlessly. He was wearing a dark blue lightweight wool jacket that perfectly complemented his outfit. As I approached, I bent down to kiss him on the cheek, but he reacted quickly and caught me off guard. In the end, he let me go and led me to his car. The restaurant is nearby. I hope you enjoy Italian cuisine. Italian cuisine is not my favorite. It's not that I don't like it at all, but I usually prefer something else. But it was too late to change plans, and I would have just eaten a salad. Yes, I love Italian cuisine. Let's go. The restaurant was pleasant, though quite loud and packed. It wasn't the ideal setting for romance. We would need to wait until we went to the club for a more private experience. I was impressed by the quality of the food and genuinely enjoyed it. At one point, I found myself thinking that I should bring Mark here someday. Andy appeared to be a regular, as most of the staff and the owner greeted her by name. She was a full-figured Italian woman who kept approaching him, giving him nudges and winks while glancing in my direction. Twice, she made the OK sign with her thumb and forefinger. By 8 o'clock, our meal and 2 bottles of wine had vanished, and we were ready to head out. The club was merely half a block away, so we walked while chatting. I linked my arm with his and nestled close, noticing the envious looks from the other women we passed. You seemed really popular over there. I assume this isn't your first visit? Absolutely not. I always take my dates there the first time. It kind of sets the tone for the rest of the evening, don't you think? I grunted in response, digesting the information. It wasn't his first real date, so it didn't matter. He was still shy and awkward. The atmosphere of the restaurant did little to create a romantic atmosphere. His inexperience became apparent again. As soon as we talked and I introduced him to the wonderful things in life, he quickly understood everything. Andy was a smart young man. As we walked, he put his arm around my waist. It was nice, but about 20 people were waiting for me to enter the club, and I felt unprotected, as if I was being stared at. I gently lowered his hand and whispered, "Maybe later, dear." I started to move towards the end of the queue, but he surprised me again. Andy walked up to the bouncer at the door and high-fived him. "Hey man, how are you? Do you have a place for 2 little guys?" The doorman greeted him with a smile before casting a stern glance at the men in line, who were complaining about favoritism. "For my top customer? Always." Raising the barrier, they guided us through the entrance. As we walked in, Andy quietly handed him some money. Once inside, we paid the entrance fee and received our 2 complimentary drink vouchers. Moving through another doorway, I was hit by a loud noise that made the walls vibrate. We moved to the playground, which also served as a dance floor, trying to find some kind of rhythm. It turned out to be impossible, so I took him to a corner where we had a little more free space. This was our chance to start having real fun. The couples around us came closer and touched each other, and in the dimly lit room I felt more relaxed. I hugged him and kissed him. He responded with a kiss. For the next hour, we continued to hug and kiss each other. At 9:30, I was just starting to get into the vibe, and the music had numbed my senses enough that I no longer felt like I was inside a bass drum amidst a parade. "Oh my, check the time. We should head out." "The motel is right across the street." "But Andy, I was only beginning to have fun, and we still have plenty of time." "No, I assured them we'd arrive before 10. If we're late, they'll release the room. Since this place is so nearby, it's extremely popular on a Saturday night." Taking my hand, we pushed our way to the door, which was only crowded twice this time. Once outside, I wondered if I had been permanently deafened because I could barely hear the traffic or the people waiting in line. Without waiting, Andy grabbed my hand and pulled me across the street, narrowly avoiding cars and cursing at drivers who honked at us. The night was turning into a nightmare, and I had decided this would be my one and only time with Andy, unless he surprised me in bed. And he did. As soon as we were in the doorway, Andy grabbed me and kissed me, at the same time pushing me towards the bed. I tried to calm him down, but it had no effect. And so it happened. And to tell the truth, it was a horror, not at all what I expected. I was completely disappointed. I hope Mark understands what I had to endure to save our marriage. Then, in horror, when everything was coming to a logical conclusion, I remembered that we were not protected. Collapsing onto the bed, he grinned at me and asked, "How was it? How was it? That jerk left me with nothing. Well, Mark can make amends later." A great lover. But I have to go. I have a date with my husband, and I wouldn't want to be late. It was damn late. It was only 10 o'clock at night, and we had time to get here. We only had fun for 20 minutes, and I felt like this. Awful. "Oh, you can't leave yet." He was clearly hinting at a sequel. While I was looking for my dress and shoes, I told him, "I'll do it another time, baby, but I'm in a hurry right now." "You can't leave. What will I tell my friends when they arrive?" They were delighted with it. I told them how attractive you are and that you can handle all of them. I did it for you, baby. I know what a man like you wants. He sounded like he thought it would convince me to stay. "What did you do? You invited your friends to have fun with me. How dare you? Who do you think you are? I'm not that kind of girl." From where I'm standing, I can see a married woman cheating on her husband trying to get dressed while I'm watching. Now stop pretending and come back here. I want to have some more fun before the others come. Unfortunately for him, the lamp on the bedside table was the closest to me. A heavy ceramic stand hit him on the head, and he lost consciousness. Not sure if I had really harmed him, I checked his pulse and breathing, and he seemed to be fine. Well, he asked for it. I grabbed my purse and ran out of the room, leaving the door ajar so his friends could find him and take care of him. Tears blurred my eyes. I ran 3 blocks to my car and collapsed behind the wheel. I had to wait until my hands stopped shaking before I could put the key in the ignition and start the damn thing. The evening that had once held so much promise had turned into a nightmare. I felt angry and frustrated with Andy. He had fooled me with his innocent, childlike persona, and foolishly I had believed him. Perhaps I'm old-fashioned, but I think there should be some romance on a date. This modern approach seemed to lack any effort at seduction from the man's side. What disturbed me the most was that he saw me as someone who would sleep with his friends and enjoy it. Did I really give off that impression? The drive home was a blend of humiliation and pain. I couldn't blame Mark for this situation. I had caused it myself and needed to handle the consequences. On the bright side, I no longer felt aroused. As I pulled into the driveway, I paused for a moment before preparing myself for what was to come. Mark was waiting in the living room and looked up in shock as I stumbled inside. I'm not sure if it was because I arrived early or because of my disheveled state. Messy hair and makeup, a dress missing one shoulder strap, and my shoes still in the car. I certainly looked like I'd been through a rough ordeal. "You did it. All that nonsense about loving me and wanting to save our marriage. What was that all about? Did you think I would just accept this and carry on as if nothing happened? I hope it was worth it, you a girl of easy virtue." The last remark stung. He was the second person to call me a girl of easy virtue that evening, and I had reached my limit. "Listen, mister. None of this would have happened if you hadn't crossed the line. I know about your little affair from 2 weeks ago. You were seen at the Hyatt Hotel in Carlton with some blonde woman. So don't play the moral man. All I did was take revenge to show you how I feel. Now we need to discuss this and move on with our lives. I'll make coffee, and we can sit down as usual and think about everything." I paused to catch my breath, and it was Mark's turn to speak. "I do not know who they saw, but it was not me. I was 200 kilometers away on the other side of the state, fishing, as I already mentioned. Feeling less confident, I decided to use my trump card. Jane saw you. She was there with her husband, and they saw you with another woman. Besides, I found this in your fishing jacket." I pulled out the matches and threw them at him. "Why did Dave catch a fish that weekend and you didn't? Because you definitely weren't fishing." I plopped down in a chair. "Okay, I'm waiting for you to lie, or maybe finally tell the truth." Mark's expression of disgust sent a chill through me, causing me to shiver. First, Dave rarely catches any fish, but he likes joining us without contributing. We either have to give him a few to keep Emily from complaining, or, as in this instance, he purchases some on his way back. The matches aren't mine, they belong to Steve. He travels for work and likely acquired them during a trip. He handed them to me to light the lamps one evening, and I must have accidentally pocketed them. Mark was visibly angry, and I had to acknowledge that he was either telling the truth or was exceptionally sharp. "What about Jane seeing you?" "Explain that." "I don't know any Jane, so I can't account for it, but I can prove I was on the opposite side of the state on Saturday afternoon." He pulled out his wallet and displayed a gas receipt that was stamped and dated from a station on the other side of the state, just as he had stated. Damn, he was impressive. He must have anticipated what I was upset about and successfully forged the receipt. It even included his car registration. After taking it, I examined it and nearly accused him of faking it. Then I recalled seeing it in his wallet the night I had inspected it. Things weren't unfolding as I had intended. But Jane mentioned, "Who the hell is Jane?" "You know, Jane who works with me." "No, I don't know her. I've heard you talk about her, but I've never met her. When I do, I'll definitely let her have it. Why would she try to sabotage my marriage? What did I do to upset her?" He was correct. She had never met him. How did she know it was him? She had frequently seen his photo on my desk. That must be the reason. As I was thinking about it, Mark had vanished into the kitchen, probably to grab another beer so we could resolve this. "Here are your things. Let me know where you're staying, and I'll send the rest over." He returned carrying 2 suitcases, which he threw down in front of me. He took my purse and removed my house key before putting it back. "I'm meeting with a lawyer on Monday morning and filing for divorce. I've moved half of our joint funds into my own account. What's left in the joint account is yours. Now leave." This couldn't be happening. Mark loved me. He wasn't supposed to respond like this. He was going to recognize his mistake of cheating and vow to remain loyal. What had I done wrong? Despite being caught, he continued to deny his infidelity. Sure, he had clarified other matters, but not that one. He might have switched cars with Steve or someone else to cover his tracks. That must be it. He was simply trying to appear strong and take control. Once he cooled down, we would resolve this together. "All right, I'll leave, but let's discuss this before you go and start spending money on a divorce lawyer. I know you'll come to your senses once you've calmed down." Gathering the bags, I carried them to the car and sat there, unsure of my next move. I didn't want to go to my mom's, especially not looking like this. The local hotel was my next option. Didn't I attract some attention when I walked into their lobby looking like the neighborhood troublemaker? They did provide me with a room, but with strict rules, no men allowed. Who could blame them? It took all my self-control, but I decided to give Mark some time to think. For 2 weeks, I waited for him to realize his mistake and return to me. Eventually, I had enough and called him at home. As soon as he heard my voice, he hung up. I called back twice, and he hung up each time. I waited for an hour before trying again, but the line was busy. He had left the phone off the hook. The following day, I called him at his workplace, but the receptionist informed me that he wasn't taking any calls from me. She suggested that if I had something important to discuss, I should reach out to his lawyer. Mark remained resolute and refused to engage in conversation with me. For 3 months, I tried to persuade him to talk and understand my perspective. If I could move past his infidelity, why couldn't he do the same? My frustration intensified with each passing day. How could he fail to see things from my side? I had exhausted my anger, replaced by periods of depression and frequent crying. My life had fallen apart, and I couldn't understand why. Next, I attempted to wait for him at home, but he merely glanced at me before ignoring me and going inside, shutting the door in my face. The following day, I was served an intervention order at work that forbade me from contacting Mark directly and from coming within 100 meters of him. Andy ensured he got his revenge by informing everyone at work that I had been involved with him and his friends. Even though I denied the allegations, everyone had seen me teasing him and believed his version of events. For weeks, men and their associates were hitting on me until I kneeled Andy in the groin, which finally made them understand. I couldn't afford to stay at the hotel, so I moved back in with my parents. They were understanding but held me responsible, saying it was my own mistake. I should have communicated with him. As my dad mentioned, 2 wrongs don't make a right. I was still hopeful that he might reconsider the divorce. He was merely trying to intimidate me into stepping back and apologizing. How could I possibly apologize if he refused to talk to me? That Tuesday remains vivid in my memory. I was at my desk wrapping up an account when the receptionist called to inform me that 2 men were waiting to see me. Assuming they were salespeople, I put on my best smile and went downstairs to meet them. Mark was there with another man, speaking quietly. My heart skipped a beat. Had he forgiven me? Mark gave me a nod and spoke to the other man approaching me. He then stepped back, not involved in what was about to happen. At that moment, I knew my marriage was over. Diane Andrews? It was posed as a question within a statement. I nodded yes, unable to speak. You are being served with divorce papers by your husband, Mark Andrews. The grounds are your adultery. If you don't have a lawyer, I suggest you obtain one as soon as possible. After nodding to Mark, he walked away, having completed his duty. Mark, no, I thought you loved me. How could you do this to us? I love you. I know we have problems, but we can surely work through them if we love each other. Mark's tone was icy, his statements deliberate and nearly devoid of emotion. I truly loved you with all my heart, but you tore that love away from me, along with my heart. Now all I feel for you is pity. You chose to heed someone who doesn't even know me. Where is this woman? I want to say a few things to her. Yes, she'll confirm that you were unfaithful, and we can move on from this. I'll bring her in. I hurried over to the desk and requested a smirking receptionist to page Jane for me. When Jane arrived, I felt hopeful that I could finally get him to acknowledge the truth. Jane, please tell Mark what you witnessed that weekend at the hotel. Jane merely shrugged and recounted her account once more. I saw your husband with another woman staying there. Mark was taken aback. You saw me at the Hyatt in Carlton. Jane shook her head. No, I saw her husband, not you, and it wasn't the Hyatt in Carlton. We stayed at the Regent in West Bend. Mark and I were both perplexed, though for different reasons. What was she referring to? Jane looked at me and said, I'm not sure what's happening here, but I saw the same man who used to come here to pick you up for lunch and after work. The man you brought with you to that 3-day conference in August 2 years ago. You introduced him to us as your husband, Wally. Fear overwhelmed me as I realized she was talking about a man I had a brief affair with 2 years earlier. Jane had no knowledge of my actual husband. At that exact moment, Mark also understood, and a satisfied smile spread across his face. Mark turned and walked away, loudly declaring, "See you in court." My destiny was now sealed.